Shelling of government-held parts of Syria's Aleppo kills another 5 children. Yet the mainstream media continues to ignore attacks by militants from rebel-held parts of the city. German authorities under fire after a key terror suspect slips away during a raid and after eventually being arrested, commits suicide in prison. Leaked documents suggest major US media outlets are biased towards Hillary Clinton, with some journalists even writing stories provided by the Clinton campaign. Today's top stories and the main headlines of the week. Welcome to The Weekly on RT International. To Syria, where 5 children were killed on Thursday after militants shelled the government-controlled part, the western side of Aleppo. RT's Murad Gazdiev witnessed the aftermath of the attack. I should warn you, the forthcoming footage is disturbing.
Rebel barrage began at almost exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, and it happened at the worst possible time, just as thousands of children were going to school. The first shell actually came in between these buildings. Emotions flowed freely at the hospital. Anxious relatives and parents cried and shouted and cursed the rebels and their backers.
Why are you killing us? What have we done to you? You have no heart. You are Syrians and we are Syrians. You just have no heart.
This 5-year-old girl was hit by a piece of shrapnel. A shell that landed here in western Aleppo. She was brought to the hospital with her intestines hanging out. The doctors are doing their best now to save her life. Her name was listed as Tasmim in the emergency room log. She was born after the civil war began, and in all her life she has never seen a single day of peace in Syria. This isn't easy on the medics. The sheer volume of patients leaves its mark.
It's hard psychologically on the doctors. The stress, the workload, the tension, they all take their toll.
Right now, there are more than 45 people injured, some of them in critical condition. The 4th child has just died, so in total 5 children were killed. It's very likely that the death toll will rise. Some areas are completely inaccessible to ambulances because of heavy mortar shelling.
This is Lama and this is Maria, 2 7-year-old girls. They were identified by their teacher.
They were just school children, my pupils. There was a sandwich and a bottle of water in her backpack, and also 100 liras that her father had given her. Those were our pupils. I'm really at a loss for words.
The children were on their way to school when a mortar shell landed nearby. A few of them were killed. I knew them. They went to my school.
That's Aleppo life for you. Whether you're going to school, shopping, to visit family, or just taking a walk, there's always that chance that a bomb or a shell might land at your feet. It's just the way things are. There's nothing you can do about it.
Shortly after airing the disturbing footage, we asked several international human rights organizations for comment, expecting to hear condemnation of the attacks. This is what UNICEF told us.
What concerns us is that all parties to the conflict are committing violations against children, grave violations that include killing, maiming, attacks on schools, attacks on hospitals, lack of humanitarian access, and that should stop. Violations against children in Syria should come to an end.
We also expected some sort of condemnation of the attack from Human Rights Watch. The organization claimed it simply didn't have enough information to make a comment about the situation in western Aleppo. So RT's Gayane Chichikan asked the US State Department about the latest extremist shelling.
This is a screenshot from my colleague's report. These are two girls, Maria and Lama, who were killed in the shelling of that bus stop. And I want to ask, civilian suffering in eastern Aleppo has been the focus of everybody's attention, rightly so. Does the U.S. government pay attention to civilian to what's happening to civilians in western Aleppo? Anything you can say specifically in that regard?
We consider any civilian loss of life as a result of the conflict in Syria to be one too many. And it's the reason why we were trying so hard to get a cessation of hostilities in place so that we could get back to a political negotiation. What you have now in Aleppo is full-on conflict. In that kind of climate and environment, you're going to have civilians pay the price.
Do you think the shelling of this school bus stop, the killing of these kids, was something that was to be expected in light of what's going on?
Again, I think, as I said before, any intentional targeting of civilians we would strongly condemn. I just don't have the details in this particular case.
US officials and human rights groups claim that any attack on civilians deserves severe condemnation. Well, let's show you the map here on RT International. Bring up the districts of Aleppo to show you how it's ultimately split up between, well, both warring sides. Nearly 300,000 civilians on the right, the eastern side of Aleppo. And as you can see here, approximately 1.5 million people living in the western government-controlled side of Aleppo. But for some reason, the mainstream media, for the most part, only focuses on that side of the story.
Activists say close to 100 children have been killed in the eastern part of the city.
The UN say 96 children have been killed alone in that eastern rebel-held area of Aleppo.
A 7-year-old has been live tweeting from eastern Aleppo.
Familiar scene in the embattled districts of rebel-held East Aleppo.
Unable to convince Moscow to stop bombing civilians.
You'll undoubtedly have heard a lot about the anguish and suffering of civilians in the rebel-held East. But the suffering in Aleppo is citywide. We decided to take to the streets of New York to ask people if they knew that the residents of western Aleppo were also suffering from injury, death, and destruction. Can you tell us what's happening in Aleppo right now?
There's refugees right there.
In who?
In Aleppo?
Can't even tell you. I don't watch TV that much.
What is happening in Aleppo right now?
Aleppo is a hotspot in Syria where things are totally out of control.
There's a war going on there. People can't get food and they're being killed, and it's a really terrible situation.
You know, the Russians are actually in there helping the rebels, and I don't know really what Obama is saying about that, because
the Russians are helping the Syrian government.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are helping the Syrian government, but we need to have the United States also in this conflict to sort it out.
What's happening in Aleppo is being bombed by Russians and also bombed by the Syrian Assad forces.
My understanding is they're being slaughtered by the Russians.
The Russians are bombing it again quite heavily, I understand.
And what about the rebels? Are they bombing anyone?
I don't think so. They don't have planes to begin with, so a bit hard.
Well, actually, you know, half of Aleppo is controlled by the rebel forces, and they are bombing civilian areas. Have you heard anything about this?
No, find it hard to believe.
I did not know that.
No, I'm not familiar with them doing anything like that.
I know about the atrocities happening from the government. On the other side, I haven't heard much.
I feel terrible, but I guess I don't know those details.
Do you feel like the U.S. media is being balanced in the way it covers Syria?
Of course.
I don't know.
You know, I watch mostly MSNBC because they agree with me.
We spoke to Baroness Cox, a member of the British House of Lords who visited Syria recently. She says the voice of the people in western Aleppo is, for the most part, being silenced.
Well, my replies are based on a visit to Syria recently, in which we visited not only Damascus, but we visited Aleppo, Latakia, many places. We had meetings with the Syriac Patriarch, with the Grand Mufti, with President Assad, and with local people. And so I will try to be their voice, because their voice doesn't get heard, especially on Western media. And their view is that they do not want forced regime change, thank you very much. Their view was that they elected President Assad. They have criticisms of President Assad, of course, and some of them are very understandable, but they say we elected him, we respect him, and we do not want forced regime change, because if we have that, that'll mean the country will just go into the hands of the Islamist terrorists, ISIS and the other Islamist terrorist groups. There are very few moderate armed rebels left, according to them, and they're the local people they know, and they said it'll just become another Iraq, another Libya. The way the situation is represented in the media here in the West, you always hear about the attacks by the Syrian army, about their use of barrel bombs or chemical weapons. You don't hear about the use of cluster bombs and chemical weapons and attacks by the Islamic rebel groups. And I think people in Britain are beginning to wonder why.
The mainstream media's focus on eastern Aleppo was again demonstrated in a CNN interview with Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov.
This is a little boy, he's got a name, it's called Omran Daphne, she's 5 years old. This is not a terrorist. This is a boy who is surrounded in besieged and bombarded Aleppo. What do you say to the civilians who are simply asking for the right to not be bombed? That is a war crime, sir.
It's really a tragedy, and they must insist that the moderates who want to protect them, they must separate themselves from Nusra.
Earlier, our crew managed to film the only two flags that could be seen over the eastern part of the city, one belonging to Jabhat al-Nusra, the other to ISIL. And following the latest peace talks in the Swiss city of Lausanne, the Russian Foreign Ministry said anti-terror operations against both groups in Syria will continue. Although Islamic State is not known to be present in Aleppo, its sympathizers apparently are. Despite this, US diplomats insist there are only a couple of hundred terrorists there, although that's not consistent with the numbers estimated by the United Nations.
Russia cannot use the presence of what the United Nations estimates to be a couple of hundred members of al-Nusra to justify an indiscriminate aerial bombing campaign.
1,000 of you are deciding on the destiny of 275,000 civilians.
Americans seem to have agreed with Russia that al-Nusra remains a terrorist organization. It cannot be classified as anything else, just like ISIS. And al-Nusra, of course, is linked to al-Qaeda, although it's changed its name subsequently, but its extreme ideology is still there. And the al-Nusra people refuse to separate from the other rebels, and so the whole basis of the ceasefire was destroyed.
And our correspondent Murad Gazdiev reporting daily from the embattled front lines of Aleppo. There's the front page of his Twitter feed right there. Log on and follow Murad for all the latest information from the ground. German police have been accused of major security lapses this week. It follows a failed manhunt for a terror suspect who was allegedly plotting an airport attack. Syrian national Jabr al-Bakir arrived in Germany last year and was granted refugee status. His house was raided by police last week, but he managed to flee. Al-Bakir was eventually arrested on Monday, but killed himself in prison 2 days later. Peter Oliver reports.
Right, well, 22-year-old Jabr al-Bakir was found dead in his police cell in Leipzig on Wednesday evening. Now, senior figures involved in the state of Saxony have been talking to press about the events surrounding his death, and they've been less than convincing. One of the main points that's come up is that they said that he was not an acute risk, or not deemed to be an acute risk of suicide following consultations with psychiatrists. They did confirm, though, that the main cause of death that they're saying at the moment was that he was strangled by the shirt that he was wearing from the bars of his own cell. But that statement that he wasn't deemed to be an acute risk of suicide, well, it flies in the face of comments we heard from his own lawyer.
Falsch gelaufen ist,
What went wrong is that they incorrectly estimated the danger of suicide. For me, there were enough indications that there was a self-endangering situation. There were the criminal charges. There was a hunger strike. Then there were the events inside jail, where he tampered with a socket. And what other indications do you need? I don't know.
Well, Al-Bakr is accused of plotting to blow up one of the main airports here in Berlin, but the operation surrounding trying to bring him into detention has been described as a litany of errors, really, across the media here in Germany. If we look back to 2015, he was cleared by security services and deemed not to pose a risk. He was granted asylum. There was then this operation in the city of Chemnitz where he'd been living, which was a huge operation, but failed to detain him. That resulted in a 2-day manhunt across the country before he was eventually detained in Leipzig. But it wasn't by the police, it was by Syrian refugees who he'd gone to try and get shelter. They'd detained him, tied him up, and called the authorities. Now, there's been a strong reaction from politicians. We've heard from the Interior Minister here in Germany, Thomas de Maizière, saying that, relating to the death in custody of Al-Bakr, that what happened demands a quick and comprehensive explanation. But that quick and comprehensive explanation certainly wasn't forthcoming in the press conference that we heard on Thursday. Just more questions have been raised over how somebody who was in custody, who was deemed by his lawyer to be a suicide risk, wasn't watched and was able to take his own life in this case.
Peter Oliver reporting there. Now, we discussed the mishaps by German police with former British intelligence officer Annie Machon and counter-terror expert Ricardo Beretsky. Excuse me.
Well, I'm sure the security infrastructure will say that lessons have been learnt from this, but it does sound like there was a breakdown of communications between different sections of the security forces and the police. So it's a bit of a finger-pointing exercise where they're saying it wasn't us, it was them, they'd failed to do this, they didn't get their operation sorted out ahead of time, whatever. So all this finger-pointing indicates to me that they are desperate to blame each other rather than themselves. So I think there should be quite a lot of soul-searching, because it sounds like this was a very high-level investigation, a very high-level threat, and yet they managed to miss the key alleged terrorist.
The fundamental rules in apprehending any terrorist suspect is key to get the information, because there could be a lot of other information attached to this incident. And the key is prevention. Prevention. And by failing to do the things they are supposed to do, they're actually not doing the prevention, they're causing the opposite effect. And that's a very dangerous situation.
In America, media outlets are reportedly biased towards presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, allegedly working very closely with her campaign. We will lift the lid on that story in just a moment.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
The Syrian war has seen a number of intersections when a negotiated settlement seemed, if not within reach, then not fully out of the question. Yet each time, spoilers had their way. How long will war continue to carry the day?
Turning 20 past here in Moscow. Hillary Clinton's enjoying unprecedented levels of support from the American mass media. That's according to a new leaked set of emails published by the investigative news website The Intercept. The document suggests the Democratic presidential candidate's been working very closely with the media to ensure that she's seen in a favorable light.
She clearly had come in very well prepared for this debate.
Very deliberate on her part.
Absolutely. I think is the best speech yet.
5-0. Hillary hit him on everything. She clearly managed to get under his skin.
Trump's defenders say all men talk like this. As a guy who has no doubt been in numerous locker rooms, is this how men in America talk to each other?
After the second presidential debate, some Republican supporters accused the media of bias towards Clinton. Many major U.S. newspapers openly endorse the Democratic candidate and often feature glowing articles on the 68-year-old. But when it comes to Trump, it's quite the opposite, with his supporters noticing remarkable parallels in how their candidate is negatively portrayed. So here on RT, we've taken a closer look at Hillary Clinton's relationship with the mainstream mass media.
So, how does Hillary Clinton's campaign view the press? According to newly leaked documents from the Clinton campaign, the press is made up of progressive helpers, friendly reporters, and even surrogates. The leaked documents contain a list of friendly media collaborators, including figures from CNN, ABC, The New York Times, and many other popular mainstream outlets. There are hundreds named. This is what Clinton's press secretary, Robert Merrill, wrote about Politico columnist Maggie Haberman.
We are all in agreement that the time is right to place a story with a friendly journalist that positions us a little more transparently. We have had a very good relationship with Maggie Haberman of Politico over the last year. We've had her tee up stories for us before and have never been disappointed.
The leak shows that certain analysts like Donna Brazil and Hillary Rosen were referred to as surrogates for the Clinton camp. Staffers for Miss Clinton apparently had cocktail parties with key media figures like ABC's Diane Sawyer before the campaign even began, hoping to help, quote, frame the race and establish a good relationship with the press. Was this relationship that was established on display during Sunday's debate? Some saw strong hints of bias from the anchors and moderators.
Mr. Trump, we're moving to an audience question. Secretary Clinton, we are moving to an audience question.
The audience had been instructed never to applaud. When they applauded for Trump,
we want to remind the audience to please not talk out loud. Please do not applaud. You're just wasting time.
Yet applause for Clinton was tolerated. During the debate, NBC News ran 6 fact checks of statements made by Donald Trump. None of Clinton's statements were questioned. After the debate, CNN decided to have a discussion with undecided voters. Some technical difficulties accidentally put something on the air. To many of the viewers, it looked like undecided panelists were being told what to say.
That America already is great, but we are great because we are good.
America's great. All right, so I want to ask you, what was it about Hillary Clinton's argument?
She stated that America is already great.
CNN gave an official statement insisting it was all a big misunderstanding.
The focus group was not able to hear or see the post-debate segment. It's absurd to think she was coaching the focus group in any way.
I think the state of American journalism is such that this kind of coziness and sharing notes and story drafts is the open secret, is the new norm, and it's very sad. A lot of it has to do with the corporate control of American media itself. Media outlets are basically giant media corporations, and they're going to do what they are going to do to maximize their exposure, get more readers, get more viewers, and getting the story that they can put out there, the narrative they can put out there to get more eyeballs, to get more readers. That's what they're going to do.
RT approached some of the media outlets mentioned in the leaked documents, including the New York Times and CNN, but as of yet, no response. But of course, here on RT International, we will be bringing you special coverage of the U.S. presidential election. America chooses who gets the keys to the White House on November the 8th.
When do we beat Mexico at the border? They're laughing at us. Nobody builds walls better than me. The press are liars. They're terrible people. We use people that are soft and weak. When you say we, you are stupid. The American dream is dead. Bing, 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 bong, bong, bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, bing. Because you'd be in jail.
Now, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church is on a visit to the UK with a mission to strengthen mutual trust. Patriarch Kirill will spend 3 days in London. And our correspondent Anastasia Cherkina now joins me live on the line with details on this. Nastya, Rory here in Moscow. A lot of significance being placed on this trip, isn't there?
Right, Rory, definitely this is seen as a historic visit because this is the first time in modern history where the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, is visiting Great Britain. And this is seen as a very big deal, especially because this visit, a 4-day visit, coincides with the 300-year anniversary of the presence of the Russian Church on British soil. Now, we're standing right now outside the main Russian Orthodox Church in London, the Cathedral of the Dormition and All Saints, where just minutes from now, one of the main events of the Patriarch's visit is about to kickstart. He's going to carry out a Sunday service where we've seen from the very early hours of the morning, believers here have been gathering to attend this special service, which is about to start just minutes from now. And we also know that throughout this trip, he's expected to meet with the Queen as well as the Archbishop of Canterbury in the days to come. And even though this is the first time the head of the Russian Orthodox Church visits Great Britain specifically in this capacity, we do know that Patriarch Kirill has been on quite a few very curious trips in recent years. Let's take a look.
Thanks for sharing your Sunday with us here on RT International. Coming up next, we look at how many state borders around the world are becoming increasingly militarized. This is RT International.